So today is day 2 of the 2-3 notes on linear equations and slope-intercept form. And for day 2, we're going to focus on finding X and Y intercepts and what is slope-intercept form. We're going to start to write the equations of lines, and we're going to graph some lines. So let's talk about the X-intercept. So the X-intercept is where the graph crosses the x-axis. You're supposed to know that this is the x-axis. This right here, so if I were you, I'd put a point right there. This is the X-intercept. And that ordered pair, and you'll notice on the X-intercept, that ordered pair is 1, the x value is 1, and the y value is 0. So there's always, anytime you have an x or a y-intercept, one of the two values is 0, and it's always the other value of what you're looking at. So if it's an x-intercept, the y value is 0. And I'm going to plug that into, if this is the equation of this line right here, which it is, I'm going to substitute into that equation the values that we have for x and y here and show you that they work. So if my x value is 1, I'm going to put a 1 in for the x, plus my y value is 0, put a 0 in for that, and it should equal 1, which indeed 1 plus 0 is 1, so 1 equals 1, and that checks. Now, if we didn't know what the x-intercept was, we could have put in x as our value, because maybe we didn't know that it was 1, we hadn't graphed it, and then just went through the process here. So if I had x plus 0 is equal to 1, x plus 0 would be x, so x would be equal to 1. So if you have the graph, you can just read it off of the graph. If you have just the equation and no graph, you need to know that the x-intercept means that the y value is 0, so we would be putting in 0 for y. So the y-coordinate is 0. So let's go ahead and use that theory on the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. So we're going to use the exact same equation and graph, but over here is your y-intercept. You'll notice that the x-coordinate on the y-intercept is 0 because the x value is 0 where the y value is 1. If we were just looking at this equation here and trying to find the y-intercepts, you are going to let x equal 0. So I'm going to substitute in 0 for the x, and then plus y equals 1. So 0 plus y is y, so that means y should equal 1, and sure enough, that's what we found on our graph right there. Then the other thing that we're going to look at today is slope-intercept form of a line. So y equals mx plus b, hopefully that should be familiar to you, where m is the coefficient of the x, it represents slope, and we did slope the other day, and remember that is your rise over your run or your constant rate of change. And then the y-intercept is where this graph crosses the y-axis. And you might also want to write out here that that y-intercept, because it's the y-intercept, x value is 0, and the y is going to be whatever b is. So if you're ever given an ordered pair that has a 0 in it, you should be suspicious and think, is that the y-intercept? If it's the y-intercept, x is always going to be 0. All right, so let's look at our first problem down here. So we're going to write the equation of the line using the given information. So the current rate for an Uber X in Scottsdale is a base fare of 40 cents plus a service fee of $1.80 and 90 cents per mile. So a base fare is 40 cents. So what we want to look for here, if we have a base fare of 40 cents plus a service fee of $1.80, that means even if you order the Uber and you cancel it, oftentimes they're going to charge you something, even though you didn't go any miles at all. So they're going to charge you 40 cents just as a base fee, and then they're going to charge you a service fee for who knows what on top of that. So we actually have, these are constants. No matter how many miles we drive, you're going to be charged this $1.80 and this 40 cents. So we are going to, let's see, let's let let's use that fair first, and we're going to find b. So b is always your constant. It doesn't change. In that y equals mx plus b, b is your constant. It doesn't change no matter what x is doing. And so again, that base fare of 40 cents and the service fee of $1.80, that's not going to change no matter how many miles you drive. So that's related to our b. So our b is going to equal 40 cents plus $1.80. So that's at 40 cents plus a service fee of $1.80. And then that's going to equal a total of $2.20. So those are all the constants that are going to be charged to us. Then let's talk about our slope. How much are we going to get charged per mile? So notice here that you have the word per. Per means a rate of change. And so that should be your coefficient of x. So it's 90 cents per mile. So m is going to be represented by the 90 cents. And then this, you might want to write here in your notes, this is the cost for each additional mile. Okay, and driven, I guess we should put driven in here in my wonderful handwriting. All right, so we figured out our b, our constant, and our m, our variable rate. But then we need to identify what are our variables going to represent. So let's write here on the margin, we have to define our x and our y. So I'm going to let x is always what drives the cost in this case. So it's the total cost of your Uber ride. So what is it that you need to look at to figure out that total cost? Isn't it the number of miles driven per mile? If you knew how many miles that you were going to go in your Uber ride, let's say 10, then you could take that 10 and multiply it to 90 cents and then add your 40 cents and your $1.80 onto that. So x being your independent variable is going to be the thing that drives what happens in the function. So x is your number of miles driven. Okay, and then y is going to represent your total cost after x miles, however many miles that is. Okay, so then we are going to write a linear equation in slope-intercept form to represent that cost. So we have y equals, and instead of m, we're going to use 0.9. That's what we came up for our slope, right? Times x. And then our b is positive, so I'm going to put a plus here, and then 2.20 because that's the sum of those two fees. And then that would be the equation you could use anytime you used your Uber. I'm trying to make that into a 0. All right, so now let's look at how do I write the equation of a line in slope-intercept form when I'm just giving them information. So first of all, do yourself a favor, and we need to move this. This does not belong here. It belongs over here in example 3C. So that should be 0 and -5. Okay, so I'm looking for a point. I'm either looking for my slope m and b. So if they give me m and b, it's very easy to write the equation of a line. So notice that here I have m and here I have b. I just throw it into y equals mx plus b, right? So instead of m, I'm going to replace that with what they told me the slope was, which is 3 times x. My b is positive, so I'm going to put a +1 here. And then this is the equation of the line with a slope of 3 and a y-intercept of 1. So you have to know that m is slope and that b represents y-intercept. On example 3C, they tell you m is 9, so that tells you your slope is 9, and it crosses the y-axis at, that's a 0, it's not a 9, it's a 0 and -5. And so this right here is our B, because if it crosses the y-axis, that must be your y-intercept. So y equals, instead of m, we're going to use 9, x, and then our b is -5, so we're going to put a -5 here. Whatever the sign is of b, that's the sign that goes in front of it. Okay, so I want you to, well, let's go through D and E because they're both a little bit different than B and C were. So if we have a slope of 0, that means that m is 0. And if m is 0, you should recall that that is a horizontal line. If you don't, it won't hurt you too much because you can do the math to kind of get around it. And then they give you the y-intercept here with 2, because if it intercepts the y-axis, that's your b. So I can actually write my equation, y equals, and instead of m, we would put in 0, x, and then it intercepts the y-axis at +2, so that's a +2. I can't leave my equation this way because I can actually determine what 0 times x is. It's 0, and then added to 2 is 2. So your final equation should be y is equal to 2. Now you could have gone directly to that answer without going through all of this, because as soon as you know you have a slope of 0, remember yesterday we talked about the fact that horizontal lines have the equation of y equals a number, because a horizontal line goes through the y-axis at a specific point. And this one's going through the y-axis at 2, so it happens to be y equals 2. This one's an undefined slope, so you're not going to be able to write this in slope-intercept form, because how do we put undefined in for m? We don't. So an undefined slope means that it is a vertical line, so I'm just going to abbreviate it as vert line. And then you should know that the equation of that line is x equals a number. And notice that they are telling you in this particular one that it goes through the point 4, 0. If it goes through the point 4, 0, isn't that an X-intercept? Because that's on the x-axis. So that means that that 4 goes here. So the equation of your line is x equals 4. So this is something you're going to need to study, because you're going to forget. You can't use the slope-intercept form to write the equation of a vertical line. You have to know that that vertical line goes through the x-axis at 4, so it's x equals 4. In this particular example, you were given 2 ordered pairs, neither of which is the y-intercept, which would be b. You don't have your slope, and you don't have your y-intercept. There are 2 different ways that you could choose to write the equation of the line. I'm going to go through the easiest way today, and then we're going to start looking at equations of lines a little bit more in detail, and we'll work on it more later. But first thing I want you to do is to find the slope. So we're going to set up some steps here. So step 1, find slope. So you learned a slope formula yesterday, and so I suggested that you label these. I'm going to label this one x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. So the slope formula is m equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1, because that's your change in y, divided by x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Then I'm going to write that as a template, take away all the x's and y's, and just sub in the values for my sub 1s and sub 2s. So y sub 2 is -3. Y sub 1 is -2, so I have a minus minus there, which we'll take care of in a minute. And then x sub 2 is 1, and x sub 1 is 3. So you can either throw these in your calculator exactly as you see them, or use your brain. So we add the opposite in algebra, so I'm going to do a plus minus on these and a plus plus on the numerator. And I end up with a -1 in the numerator and a -2 in the denominator. Because you have 2 negatives, you've got to simplify that to 1/2. So that is your slope. So that is what we're going to use for m. So m is 1/2. So we have part 1 of our issue because we're trying to find out y equals, we have to get it in this form, mx plus b. So now we're going to have to find b, but I have a different way. Well, actually, I think I'll do it. This is going to be the harder way, and some of you will like this way better than the way we're going to talk about later. But if I know I've got 2 points, here's an x and a y, and here's an x and a y. I can choose one of these 2 points and only one, it doesn't matter which one you choose, and substitute it in for this x here and this y here. And we just found our slope here of 1/2, which I can sub here. That means that I know my y, my m, and my x, and all I would have to do is find b. So let's take step 2 and sub into y equals mx plus b to find b. Okay, so I'm going to choose, I don't know, I'm going to choose this one because it has a 1 in it. I like to choose points that either have 0 or 1 or no negatives. I can't avoid the negatives. So instead of y, I'm going to put in a -3 and then equals. Instead of m, we found it earlier, is 1/2, and that is going to be multiplied to my x. And so instead of x, I'm going to use 1, which is nice, and then I've got plus b, because I don't know that. So that's what we're going to find. So I have -3 is equal to 1/2 plus b, and then to solve, I'm going to subtract 1/2 and subtract 1/2. So you can either use your calculator, or you can know that 3 minus 1/2 is going to give you -3 1/2, which we don't want a mixed number. So -3 1/2 is -7/2. So my b turns out to be -7/2. That's equal to b. So then step 3, we're going to write our equation. And so we get y equals. Now we throw that point away. We don't need the 1, -3 anymore. We're just going to write y equals. And then my slope we found was 1/2. And then that is equal to, or times x. And then my b was -7/2, so I put a minus here, and then 7/2. And that's it. So that one's a little bit harder when you only have 2 points, none of which is the y-intercept. Okay, so then let's look at how do we graph a line. So in order to graph a linear equation, you must have it solved for y. So the very first thing I'm going to do is solve this equation for y. So I'm going to add 2x and add 2x. So then you've got to identify your slope and y-intercept. So I've got 2x plus 3. We always want the x term to come first. So in this case, my slope is 2, and I like to write my slope as a fraction so I can see my rise and my run. So my rise is going to be 2, which is an up-down direction, and my run is a 1, which is a right-left direction. And then I want you to understand that you can also write your slope in 2 different ways, because you have to cover your whole graph, and so you might have to go one direction versus another. So I'm going to change the signs of both the x and the y, and so, or my slope is equal to a -2 over a -1. All right, and then the other thing you want to identify is your b. So b is equal to +3. So we're going to start right here with our b. The very first thing you do is plot your y-intercept. So if b is 3, I'm going to plot it at 3. I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger so I can see what I'm doing. Whoops. And then let me move that over. Okay. So then I'm going to plot 3 on that y-axis, and then you are going to stair step, meaning you're going to do your rise over your run. So a rise of 2 means I'm going to go up 2, and a run of 1 means to the right 1, because those are your 2 positive directions. A rise of -2 means you would go down 2, and a run of -1 means you would go to the left 1. We still end up on the same line. So notice that if I go up 2 to the right 1, I land here. Up 2 to the right 1, and you want to fill in your entire graph as far as you can go. Sorry about that. All right, so then we need to go in the other direction, so we're going to go down 2 and to the left 1, which puts us here, down 2 to the left, and I'm going to keep going until I cover my entire graph. Okay, so then I'm going to connect those with a straight line. I can't do a straight line on my iPad, but I'm going to do my best. Well, that's pretty good. And there you go. So notice that my slope was positive, even though I have 2 negatives here, 2 negatives make a positive. So my slope was positive. The tip of this line is tilted in a positive direction. My y-intercept is 3, and I am going through the y-axis at 3. Oh, so we should probably put a 2 on here, because the second step is to stair step that slope. All right, so let's look at 4B. I want you to try 4B on your own. So pause the video, solve that equation for y, graph it, find your slope and y-intercept, graph it, and then restart the video. Okay, so if we are solving this for y, we want to subtract 3 from both sides, because I want y by itself. And so I get y equals, that's a negative, right? Yeah, -2x minus a 3. So let's do step 1 first. So our b is equal to -3. So I'm going to plot -3 down here. And then our second step is our slope. So our slope is -2. So I'm going to write that as -2 over 1, or change both signs, +2 over -1. So with my rise here, I'm going to go down 2 to the right 1, or up 2 to the left 1. So here we go. So down 2 to the right 1. I always like to stop and say, is that tilted in a negative direction? Sure enough. And continue filling out the entire graph. Okay. And then up 2 to the left 1. And then, ooh, that was terrible. Let's see, undo that. Clearly I'm having trouble drawing a straight line on that direction. All right, so there you go. Hopefully you did well with that. Then let's look at 4C. Now, as soon as you are missing your X or your Y term, you know something's up. This is either a vertical or a horizontal line. So I like you to look at the fact that, oh, it says y is equal to 3. So if I were you, I would plot a point at 3 on the y-axis, because it says y is equal to 3. So look at this point. How do you cut? Since it's on the y-axis, we want to cut the y-axis. How do you cut the y-axis into 2 pieces at that point? Do you cut it this way into 2 pieces? Well, that wouldn't make any sense, because you're cutting on that axis. Wouldn't you cut the axis in this direction to cut it into 2 pieces, which makes a horizontal line? And if you recall, horizontal lines are y equals a number, and that's it. If you were asked to find the slope, you can walk on this line, so the slope is 0. And then if you're asked to find the y-intercept, it's going through the y-axis at 3. Let's look at when we're missing our y term. So if I'm missing my y term, and I only have my x term, and it says x is equal to 3, we'll plot 3 on the x-axis. And again, ask yourself, how am I going to cut this x-axis into 2 pieces at this point? Do I cut the x-axis right along in this direction? Well, that doesn't make sense, because you're cutting along the x-axis. It won't cut it into 2 pieces. But if I cut it this way, now I've cut it into 2 pieces, which makes a vertical line. So anytime you're missing your y value, you have a vertical line. And then your slope of a vertical line, because you cannot walk on it, is undefined, so that's UD. And then your y-intercept, it's not crossing the y-axis, is none. We don't put 3 because that's not where the graph's crossing the y-axis. Okay. That was a 2-minute warning. All right, so then let's move and look over here. So part of this verbiage got messed up right here. It got messed up with this right here. So let's just read it and then I'm gonna do the problems. So for the next set of problems, you are going to find the x and y intercepts of, well, x and, sorry, got split up, y-intercepts of each line, verify with a graphing calculator. So we're not going to verify with a calculator on here, but if you need help, you can come see me personally. All right, so right here, if you want to find the x and y intercepts, remember from our discussion at the beginning, x-intercept you let y equal 0, y-intercept you let x equal 0. So here's our equation.
1-minute warning.
So for the x-intercept, you're going to let y equal 0. And if I were you, I would write that down every time. And so then I'm going to take that equation that we're looking at, and I'm just going to substitute in 0 for y. So instead of y, I'm putting in a 0. And I'm going to write it the rest just exactly as you see, 2x plus 3. So now my goal is to solve for x. So if I'm solving for x, I'm going to subtract 3, and I get negative 3 is equal to 2x, and then divide by 2 and divide by 2. So that does not go in there evenly, so we're going to leave it as a fully reduced fraction. So that means that x is equal to negative 3 over 2.
Class has started.
So if x is negative 3 over 2, that's the x value of the x-intercept. And then remember, we said let y equal 0, so that is the y value. So the y value is 0. And that's it. So then we're going to find the y-intercept next. So for the y-intercept, you are going to let x equal 0. So this time I've got y equals, because I'm letting x equal 0, so I've got 2 parentheses plus 3. And instead of x, we're putting in a 0 here. So don't I get y equals 2 times 0 is 0 plus 3, and doesn't that mean y is equal to 3? So if y is equal to 3 in my y-intercept, the 3 goes where the y value was, and of course, didn't we let x equal 0? So if you're comfortable with this, you can go ahead and try the other 3, so you can pause the video and try them. If you want to watch me do another one, don't pause the video. Watch me do example 5b. All right, so same thing that we did on the last problem. We're going to find the x-intercept first. So we're going to let y equal 0. So I have 5x plus, instead of y, we're going to use substitution parentheses, equals negative 20. And then I'm going to substitute in 0. So I end up with 5x plus 0 equals negative 20. 5x equals negative 20. And then we would divide by 5. And I get x equals negative 4. So now I know that my x value of the x-intercept is negative 4, and because we let y equal 0, the y value is 0. All right, so let's find the y-intercept. So for the y-intercept, you're going to let x equal 0. And so this time I'm going to put substitution parentheses around my x plus 2y equals negative 20. All right, putting 0 in, I get 0 plus 2y equals negative 20. 2y equals negative 20. And then we're going to divide by 2, and we get y is equal to negative 10. So I know that in my y-intercept, the y value is going to be negative 10, and because we let x equal 0, the x value is 0. Now, when we're missing an x or a y value, our x and y intercepts become interesting. So if this is x equals 7, I'm just going to do a quick little sketch here. If this were x equals 7, you would put a point over here at 7. Let's just say that that's 7 on the x-axis. And if it's x equals 7, you're going to cut through the x-axis at 7. Wouldn't your line look like that? So you're going to have an x-intercept, but no y-intercept. So your y-intercept on this one is none. So if you have x equals something, your y-intercept, the other thing, is none. But notice that this is where the graph is crossing the x-axis. So the x value is 7, and of course the y value is 0. So that becomes your x-intercept, 7, 0. And kind of the same thing over here. So if I'm going to sketch this graph here, but if I sketch it at y equals 7, you put a point on the y-axis where 7 would be. So let's just assume that that's where 7 is. And you're going to cut through the y-axis at 7, which means it becomes a horizontal line. Notice that you are not going to have an x-intercept, but you do have a y-intercept. So your x-intercept is none. And your y-intercept, this ordered pair, is 0 for the x value, but 7 for the y value. So that is your y-intercept of 0, 7. And that is all that we're going to do today. So try your homework. Let me know if you have any questions. Good luck.